What if a single, instinctive act reaching for a sword not meant for your hand could rewrite the destiny of two civilizations? What if love, born from obligation, became the spark that united worlds once divided by fear, bloodlines, and belief? In this story, an off-world mercenary accidentally triggers an ancient alien law, binding himself to a dying noble clan, and unknowingly becoming the chosen vessel of a prophecy older than the stars. But what does it truly mean to be chosen not by power, not by lineage, but by resonance of the soul? Is legacy something you're born into, or something you create with every defiant breath? Stay with us as we uncover how one human unexpected, unprepared becomes the bridge between species, the father of a hybrid child that could reshape the stars, and the key to unlocking a new kind of evolution. In the chronicles of galactic civilizations, there exists a concept older than war itself, the symbolic weapon. Unlike mere instruments of destruction, these artifacts are living repositories of memory, will, and destiny. They are not forged to kill but to choose. To select, with unnerving precision, the next vessel worthy of carrying a lineage's spirit across the gulfs of time and space. Among the Kade, an ancient starfaring species whose history weaves through the fabric of cosmic myths, such a weapon was known as the Alien blade. Its edge gleamed not with metal, but with the crystallized echoes of ancestral oaths. When wielded, it did not merely strike, it resonated, seeking the unique frequency of a soul capable of bearing the clan's essence forward. To the Kade, touching the blade without invitation was no different from awakening a sleeping god. But fate, as it often does, chose an unlikely hand. On a forgotten outpost world, a human mercenary named Kade Mercer sought nothing more than a brief respite from his nomadic contracts. The planet, little more than a waypoint for fuel and supplies, was never meant to be more than a footnote in his restless journey. Yet as storms raged, Kade found himself drawn to the heart of a gathering, an ancient duel unfolding on the rain-slicked stones of the Kade arena. Two figures clashed beneath the violet sky, a woman clad in battle-worn obsidian armor, her silver hair whipping like living threads of starlight, and her towering adversary a brute embodiment of Kade dominance. Blood had already painted the ground, but it was not this violence that anchored Kade's gaze. It was the sword resting beside the fallen warrior, pulsing faintly as if breathing in rhythm with the planet itself. Compelled by a force he couldn't name, Kade stepped forward. It was not heroism, not valor. It was something far simpler, an instinct honed by years of seeing the strong crush the weak, an old scar of conscience that refused to fade. He lifted the blade. The moment his fingers closed around the hilt, the world shuddered. Across the centuries, the Alien blade had known only Kade hands. Yet now, in the grasp of an off-worlder, it awakened. Energy rippled through Kade's bones not as pain, but as recognition. The dueling ground fell silent. Even the storm seemed to hold its breath. By the ancient laws of Kade, the act was clear: he who wields the clan's blade in defense of its bearer becomes bound to that bearer in blood, in bond, in destiny. Kade, unaware, had just become husband by blade. This phenomenon is not mere fiction. Consider the 1968 Nevada incident, long buried in classified reports. A U.S. Air Force pilot, during a routine survey, encountered a crash site of unknown origin. Among the debris, a device resembling an archaic ceremonial dagger emitted low-frequency vibrations. When the pilot, out of sheer human curiosity, reached to retrieve it, the artifact's energy signature spiked. Subsequent accounts suggest the man experienced a cascade of ancestral visions not his own, but belonging to a civilization far older than humanity. Witnesses claimed his demeanor altered irreversibly afterward, as if carrying an invisible mantle of purpose he neither sought nor understood. The parallels are chilling. A human touches a forbidden relic, unwittingly binds himself to an alien legacy, and becomes an instrument of fate beyond his own making. Back in the Ketheri stronghold, Kade's moment of intervention spiraled into ceremony. What began as a simple act of defense had invoked laws that no one, not even the Ketheri elders, dared to challenge. For the blade had chosen. And in doing so, it had rewritten the lineage's trajectory. But why him? Kade Mercer was no hero. A drifter, a survivor, his past was littered with contracts taken in the gray shadows of morality. Yet, perhaps it was this very ambiguity that resonated with the Alaran blade. Where others saw purity in bloodlines, the blade sought purity of will. A mind unshackled by dogma. A heart that, though scarred, still knew the weight of honor when confronted with injustice. This raises an uncomfortable truth: are we ever truly chosen by destiny, or do we choose it through the sum of our unnoticed actions? In Kade's case, the answer was forged in that singular moment when blade met hand. The Ketheri clan, teetering on the edge of extinction, now had a new bondmate. One whose very presence defied centuries of tradition. The implications rippled far beyond cultural embarrassment. It challenged the foundation of Ketheri identity, forced them to confront whether their legacy was defined by blood, or by the courage to adapt. For Kade, the journey had just begun. The sword was not a reward. It was a burden wrapped in destiny. And the universe, vast and indifferent, watched in silence. To the Ketheri, lineage was never a matter of mere genetics. Blood was memory. It carried not only the chemical instructions of life, but the resonant frequencies of a soul's history. Every heartbeat echoed with the vibrations of ancestors long departed, each pulse a subtle broadcast into the fabric of existence. It is through these waves, undetectable by crude human instruments, but undeniable in their presence, that the Alaran blade listened. When Kade Mercer's hand closed around that ancient hilt, the blade did not assess his chromosomes. It did not query his parentage, nor did it sift through his terrestrial DNA. Instead, it tuned itself to the deeper current, the rhythm of his defiance, the cadence of his loyalty, the quiet resonance of a soul scarred yet unbroken. In that instant, beyond conscious comprehension, the blade recognized him. This concept is not foreign to human encounters with the unknown. Consider the documented cases of UFO abductees recounting experiences of DNA scanning and brainwave synchronization. Reports dating back to the 1970s describe individuals subjected to non-invasive procedures where no physical samples were taken, yet the experiencers reported sensations of being mapped, tuned, or harmonized with an external intelligence. The famous Allagash abductions, 1976, speak of a shared vision where abductees saw a lattice of light aligning with their bodies, accompanied by an overwhelming sense of being evaluated, not dissected, but resonated. What if these so-called scans are not genetic tests in the biological sense, but rather frequency matching protocols? A search for that elusive resonance, the echo of a mind that vibrates in phase with the alien consciousness. For the Ketheri, this was not speculation. Their society had long abandoned the primitive metrics of blood purity. Instead, they revered the rare alignment of a being's core frequency with the ancestral waveform encoded within relics like the Alaran blade. It was a communion of patterns, a symphony of matching vibrations, where the chosen individual became a living amplifier of the clan's legacy. Kade's unexpected bond was not an error. It was the inevitable intersection of his inner resonance with the blade's ancient song. But this raises an unsettling question: how many times had other species attempted to synchronize with humanity, only to find discord? How many relics, artifacts, or consciousness probes had been abandoned because the planetary hum of Earth failed to align with their frequencies? Perhaps Kade was not the first to be evaluated but the first to resonate. The Starchild skull phenomenon, while controversial, adds another layer to this hypothesis. Discovered in Mexico, the anomalous cranial remains exhibit bone density and morphology that defy conventional human explanation. Some researchers posit that such anomalies are evidence of genetic hybridization attempts, where resonance incompatibility led to developmental failures. A crude experiment in matching frequencies across incompatible substrates. But Kade Mercer, unknowing, unprepared, succeeded where designed hybrids failed. Not because of superior genetics, but because of his unfiltered will. This distinction is vital. In a universe where many civilizations seek to perpetuate themselves through rigid preservation of form, the Cathari understood that evolution does not favor the strongest, nor the purest, but the most adaptable resonator. Their blade did not need a perfect Cathari air. It needed a vessel whose soul could sing in harmony with the ancient frequencies, while adding a new, untainted note to the song. As Kade walked the echoing halls of his newly inherited stronghold, every step was accompanied by the silent murmur of the blade's approval, not through words, but through the imperceptible thrum of matching wavelengths. The walls, carved with sigils attuned to the invariant line, responded subtly. Where Cathari airs had once trained for years to achieve minor sympathetic resonance, Kade's mere presence invoked ripples across the clan's sacred spaces. Unintentionally, he had become the tuning fork of an ancient song long thought lost. But resonance is a double-edged phenomenon. The elders whispered of the discordance trials, epochs in Cathari history when incompatible frequencies led to cultural collapse. When heirs were chosen by lineage alone, ignoring the vibrational compatibility, their reigns often coincided with eras of internal fragmentation, civil unrest, and spiritual dissonance. The lesson was clear: heritage without harmony breeds ruin. Kade's bond with the blade, however accidental, was the antithesis of these failures. In his defiance of tradition, he embodied the very adaptability that the Alaran blade sought to preserve. He was, by his nature, a disruptor of stasis. And it was this quality that resonated with a relic designed not merely to maintain a lineage, but to ensure its relevance across cosmic tides of change. Let us not romanticize this selection. Kade was no hero. His past was littered with choices born of necessity, not nobility. Yet perhaps this very pragmatism, this relentless refusal to be defined by circumstance, was the frequency that aligned with the blade's deeper imperative. This forces us to reconsider the countless CE5, close encounters of the fifth kind, events where individuals initiate contact through meditative coherence. These protocols, dismissed by mainstream science, often report successful contact not with the technologically superior, but with the vibrationally attuned. Are these experiences not echoes of the same principle? A search for resonance beyond biology, beyond language, beyond the limitations of form? For the Cathari, Kade was a living anomaly, a human whose soul sang the right song. But anomalies have always been the seeds of evolution. As the weight of his unintended bond settled upon his shoulders, Kade Mercer stood on the precipice of a transformation neither he nor the Cathari had foreseen. He was no longer merely a man out of place. He was a nexus, a bridge where frequencies converged, where legacy and potential coalesced into something entirely new. And somewhere, deep within the blade's crystalline core, the echoes of the invariant line hummed with quiet approval. For the first time in generations, the song was complete. To understand the Cathari's obsession with legacy is to grasp the suffocating weight of history pressed into every breath they take. Unlike human lineages, which often fracture across centuries of migration, conflict, and reinvention, the Ketheri bear the full, unbroken weight of their ancestry not as pride, but as mandate. Their bloodlines are not remembered, they are enforced, encoded into their very being through a ritualized web of expectation. Within the cold stone walls of the Invar stronghold, this burden manifests physically. The walls pulse faintly with ancestral energy, their surfaces etched with sigils that react to the proximity of true heirs. Kade Mercer, an accidental bondmate, feels these reactions viscerally. Where Larati moves through these halls in resigned familiarity, the walls respond to Kade with a hesitant curiosity as if the stronghold itself questions his right to walk among its lineage. The Ketheri do not inherit titles. They inherit debts to their ancestors, to their clan, to the very fabric of their culture. This is the true weight of inheritance, a life not lived for oneself, but as a vessel for the will of the dead. To falter is not merely personal failure, it is the unraveling of a lineage's place in the cosmic order. But when does reverence become a cage? Consider the real-world parallel of the Hopi people, an indigenous tribe whose oral histories speak of the star ancestors, beings who descended from the sky, imparting wisdom, cosmology, and spiritual practices designed to harmonize with the earth. For centuries, the Hopi maintained these teachings in isolation, resisting the tides of assimilation and modernity. Yet, this fierce preservation came at a cost. As younger generations gravitated towards the promises of a globalized world, the elders struggled to maintain relevance, their traditions calcifying into rigid dogma rather than living wisdom. In much the same way, the Ketheri's adherence to bloodline purity and ritualistic succession had fossilized their culture. The very mechanisms designed to preserve their identity had become gnarled chains, binding them to a past that could no longer adapt to an evolving galaxy. Larati herself embodies this paradox. A warrior trained not merely in combat, but in the performance of legacy, she is both proud torchbearer and reluctant prisoner. Her challenge to Drachar was not born of personal ambition, but of a desperate attempt to halt the erosion of her clan's standing. Yet, even as she fought, there lingered the unspoken question: was she defending her ancestors' honor, or merely delaying the inevitable irrelevance of tradition unfit for survival? Kade's intrusion disrupted the cycle not as a liberator, but as an anomaly. His very existence within the clan structure forced a re-evaluation. If a foreigner could resonate with the blade, if an outsider could invoke the ancestral song, then what did it truly mean to be Ketheri? The blade's choice was not a validation of Kade's superiority. It was a condemnation of the clan's stagnation. In choosing an off-worlder, the blade revealed a brutal truth: the future of the Invar lineage lay not in the insular purity of blood, but in the willingness to evolve, to adapt, to forge new harmonies from dissonant notes. Yet such revelations come with a price. The Stronghold's elders viewed Kade as a virus, an invasive element disrupting the sacred equilibrium. Their faces, carved by centuries of tradition, betrayed a cocktail of disdain and fear. Not fear of Kade as a man, but fear of what his presence implied, the irrelevance of their rigid hierarchies in the face of a universe that no longer cared for their ancient oaths. This is the moment when tradition, once a bastion of identity, reveals itself as a shackle. In human history, we have seen this pattern repeat. The fall of dynasties, the collapse of empires, not because they were conquered by superior force, but because they refused to evolve. The Tokugawa shogunate, insulated by centuries of isolationist policy, crumbled under the weight of modernization precisely because its traditions, once vital, became obsolete in a changing world. Kade's reluctant ascension mirrors these pivotal moments. He is not the revolution incarnate, but the catalyst exposing the cracks already present. As he stands before the council, every gaze upon him is a reflection of this existential dread. To accept him is to accept that bloodlines, unexamined, are insufficient. To reject him is to deny the Blade's will, a blasphemy that even the most conservative elder dares not commit openly. Thus, the burden of inheritance shifts. No longer is it Kade's burden to justify his presence. It becomes the Catheri's burden to reconcile with the Blade's choice. To evolve, or to perish in the suffocating embrace of obsolete honor. In this tension lies the heart of the narrative. For tradition, when wielded without wisdom, becomes no different than rusted chains adorning a sinking ship. The question is not whether to sever the chains, but whether to forge them anew into bridges that span the chasm between past and future. Kade Mercer, in his unintended defiance, offers such a bridge not through conquest, but through resonance. And the Catheri must decide if their legacy is a tombstone, or a foundation. The first wound Kade Mercer suffered in the Catheri stronghold was not dealt by a blade, nor by the venom-laced words of ancient elders. It was subtler, sharper, a wound of isolation, inflicted by the suffocating weight of an alien culture so alien it rendered his own instincts obsolete. In the labyrinthine corridors of tradition, Kade was not merely an outsider. He was a fracture line, a discordant note in a symphony rehearsed for millennia. The Catheri culture was ritual made flesh. Every movement, every word, every gesture was laden with layers of significance, invisible yet crushing. To step with the left foot forward meant deference, to lower one's gaze at the wrong moment was to invite dishonor. Even silence was not empty, it was coded, structured, a language unto itself. Kade's straightforward human mannerisms, his casual shrugs, his unguarded eye contact were as disruptive as shouts in a cathedral. This was not a matter of xenophobia. It was a matter of cultural physics. Just as two objects cannot occupy the same space without collision, two civilizations cannot share ritualistic space without friction. The Catheri saw Kade's human pragmatism as vulgar, a desecration of sacred form. He, in turn, grappled with a reality where sincerity was secondary to symbolic precision. Yet within this suffocating framework, a question emerged: could an outsider learn the dance of an ancient culture, or would he redefine its rhythm by sheer force of being? History offers a chilling precedent. In Brazil, 1977, an Air Force pilot known only as Captain X was deployed during the infamous Colliery's UFO encounters. What began as routine patrols escalated into surreal confrontations. The captain reported being subjected to an invitation though no words were spoken. In a state of paralysis, he was mentally guided through an elaborate telepathic ritual, one that mirrored Earth's own shamanic traditions yet emanated from utterly foreign minds. The ritual was not a test of belief, but of cognitive compatibility. The aliens did not care for his understanding. They sought resonance. Captain X described it as being forced to dream in someone else's language, a cognitive trial by fire. His human mind struggled to adapt, yet in that crucible of alien thought, a fragment of connection was forged not through logic, but through the primal human capacity for pattern recognition, for adaptation under pressure. Kade's trial among the Catheri echoed this experience. Each council assembly became a battlefield where his words, so familiar to human ears, were mangled by the rigid syntax of Catheri protocol. What he meant as honor was heard as arrogance, what he intended as humility resonated as weakness. His every utterance was a blade slicing through the delicate fabric of cultural expectation. And yet, it was this very dissonance that held transformative power. The Catheri, for all their reverence of tradition, found themselves fascinated by Kade's unfiltered authenticity. His refusal to bow to ritual for ritual's sake, his insistence on directness, forced the elders to confront a notion long buried beneath centuries of ceremonial dust, that adaptability, not adherence, is the true measure of strength. The outsider's trial was not of Kade's choosing, but his response to it became a crucible of cultural alchemy. In private, Larati observed his struggles with a blend of exasperation and quiet admiration. Where her training had taught her to navigate the suffocating maze of Ketheri decorum, Kade bulldozed through it with a blunt honesty that, while jarring, illuminated the ossified absurdities of her people's dogma. His questions, naive yet incisive, pierced through layers of tradition that had long since lost their meaning, surviving only as hollow echoes of their original purpose. "Why must I kneel before a symbol when standing tall speaks more truth?" he once challenged, to which no elder could offer a reply that did not circle back upon itself in a loop of ceremonial logic. This tension mirrors the broader question haunting humanity's potential future in interstellar diplomacy: will our greatest asset be technological parity, or the stubborn fluidity of human adaptation? Kade Mercer, without intent or grand vision, became a case study in this hypothesis. He adapted not by mimicking, but by integrating. He learned to navigate the Ketheri's symbolic landscapes while subtly redrawing their boundaries. In time, his presence forced a recalibration of what it meant to uphold tradition. He did not shatter their rituals. He repurposed them, infusing alien forms with human substance. What began as a clash evolved into a synthesis. Yet, the most profound victory lay not in council chambers or ritual duels, but in the subtle shift of perception. The very elders who had dismissed him as a contaminant began to see in Kade a reflection of their own ancestors, not in form, but in essence. The ancient Ketheri pioneers, who once dared to cross the abyss between stars, had embodied the same disruptive courage, the same irreverent defiance of stasis. In Kade, they recognized a rekindling of that flame. Thus, the outsider's trial revealed its true nature, not a gauntlet to be survived, but a mirror held to a stagnant culture, forcing it to see its own decay. And in that reflection, the seeds of renewal took root. The Ketheri did not believe in simple tests of strength. To them, the body was a vessel, the mind a lens, and the spirit a resonant field. Each must align, each must survive, each must transcend. Thus, their rite of passage was not a gauntlet of brute endurance, but a ceremony of deconstruction and reconstruction, where the initiate was stripped bare, layer by layer, until only the essence remained. For Kade Mercer, an outsider bound by blade and law, the trials loomed not as obstacles to overcome, but as an alien crucible where his very self would be unmade and reforged in frequencies older than human memory. The trial of body was deceptive in its simplicity. It was not a duel of swords or a contest of force. Instead, Kade was placed within the chamber of Brawl, a living architecture that responded to bioelectric signatures. The walls pulsed with rhythmic contractions, adjusting gravity, atmospheric pressure, even cellular resonance. His muscles rebelled, his bones sang with microfractures, every breath became a negotiation with an environment designed to expose the body's fragility. But this was not torture. It was dialogue. The chamber spoke in the language of pressure, force, and adaptation. Kade's body, shaped by human environments, learned to recalibrate not through resistance, but through yielding without breaking. The pain was not an enemy. It was a teacher. In many ways, his experience mirrored accounts from Project Serpo, the alleged exchange program where human participants lived among the Ebons, an alien species whose homeworld's gravity, atmosphere, and light spectra differed drastically from Earth's. Participants reported initial physical collapse, yet over months, their bodies adapted, bone density increased, circulatory rhythms shifted, even vision recalibrated to the Ebon's infrared-rich environment. Adaptation was not a choice. It was the only language evolution spoke. The trial of mind was far more insidious. Within the sanctum of Krelith, Kade was confronted not with puzzles or intellectual challenges, but with a phenomenon the Ketheri called reflection wells. These were not mirrors, but semi-organic surfaces that absorbed and refracted consciousness. Standing before them, Kade saw not his face, but his memories raw, unfiltered, mercilessly honest. Failures he had buried resurfaced, the friend he left to die on Epsilon Thorn, the contract he accepted knowing innocence would suffer, the choices that had carved his path in blood and regret. The reflection wells did not judge. They amplified. His mind, so accustomed to compartmentalizing, found no refuge. Every evasion looped back, every justification dissolved. Yet, it was in this relentless exposure that Kade grasped a truth the Ketheri had known for millennia: self-awareness is the first act of transcendence. Human rites of passage from the Spartan Agoge to the Aboriginal walkabout have long understood this principle. Stripped of societal masks, the initiate confronts their raw self, emerging not purified, but integrated. The Ketheri took this to its apex. For them, the mind's trial was not about knowledge, it was about coherence. To navigate the currents of an alien culture, one's inner dissonance had to be reconciled. Kade's fractured self, when aligned, became a sharper instrument of will than any polished persona. The final ordeal, the trial of spirit, defied physical description. In the chamber of Veyron, Kade was submerged not in liquid, but in a field of harmonic resonance, a living vibration that blurred the boundaries between self and environment. Here, the song of the Ilaran blade whispered not in words, but in ancestral frequencies, threads of identity weaving through time. Kade felt the pulse of the Invar lineage not as memories, but as echoes of choices, ancient yet immediate. He was no longer Kade Mercer, the mercenary. He was Kade Invar, a node in a network of lives, carrying the weight of triumphs and failures not his own, yet now inseparable from his being. This was not possession. It was integration through resonance. Project Serpo's testimonies recount similar phenomena. The Ebon culture lacked written language, transmitting knowledge through resonant thought forms, where data, emotion, and ancestral memory merged into singular experiences. Human participants described the sensation of being many while remaining one, a state eerily akin to Kade's communion within the chamber of Veyron. The Ketheri understood what humanity had only begun to glimpse, that spirit is not an ethereal concept, but a vibrational construct, a waveform that persists beyond matter. To harmonize with such a construct was to step beyond individuality, into the shared field of lineage, purpose, and cosmic identity. When Kade emerged, his body bore the microfractures of adaptation, his mind the scars of unflinching self-confrontation, and his spirit the subtle hum of ancestral resonance. He had not passed the trials by conquering them. He had passed by becoming permeable, by allowing the alien currents to flow through him, reshaping not what he was, but how he resonated. Thus, the rite of passage revealed its true form, a rite of recalibration, where survival depended not on strength or cunning, but on the ability to tune oneself to the evolving song of existence. And in doing so, Kade Mercer ceased to be merely human. He became the first Invarian bridge, a living frequency where Ketheri tradition and human adaptability coalesced into a new harmonic. The Ketheri viewed bloodlines as sacred geometry, perfect patterns echoing through generations. To alter this design was to invite chaos into a system built on harmonic precision. Yet, there existed a prophecy, long buried beneath layers of political denial, whispering of a moment when these perfect lines would fracture, giving birth not to ruin, but to rebirth through fusion. Kade Mercer's accidental bond with the Invar lineage was no longer seen as an aberration. It was a manifestation of the forbidden prophecy, the foretold merging of alien and foreign essence, not as contamination, but as evolution's inevitable step. The Catheri's horror mirrored ancient human fears. In the Dulce base files, long classified and whispered through the dark corridors of conspiracy, accounts surfaced of joint human-alien programs aimed at creating hybrid beings. These were not grotesque experiments of body alone. The true objective was integration of genetic memory, emotional frameworks, and cognitive frequencies. Early failures were attributed not to biological rejection, but to a lack of resonant compatibility. The hybrids could not harmonize the human chaotic emotional spectrum with the methodical coherence of their alien progenitors. Yet within this failure lay a revelation: hybridization was never about genes. It was about bridging ontological gaps, creating beings capable of existing between two frequencies without collapsing into incoherence. Kade, unknowingly, embodied this success. His every interaction within the Catheri stronghold rippled through ancient assumptions. Where elders feared genetic dilution, the blade had recognized vibrational amplification. Kade's human unpredictability did not corrupt the Invar frequency, it enriched it, introducing adaptive variability where rigid stasis had once reigned. The blade's glow, once a steady hum, now pulsed with a complexity unseen for centuries. This was the prophecy's true warning, not of bloodline extinction, but of pattern transcendence. The sacred geometries of lineage were never meant to be preserved in crystalline stillness. They were designed to evolve, to incorporate, to grow richer through harmonic blending. The fear of losing identity is a universal cultural trauma. In human history, every act of integration, be it cultural, genetic, or ideological, has been met with resistance born from the dread of obliteration. Yet, time and again, the result has been synthesis, not erasure. The fusion of Homo sapiens with Neanderthals, once viewed as fringe theory, is now accepted as a foundational chapter of human evolution, enhancing immune responses, neurological diversity, and adaptive traits. The Catheri's forbidden prophecy mirrored this truth on a cosmic scale. It spoke of a child born from the convergence of alien and outsider, whose existence would not dilute the bloodline but would reconfigure it into a new harmonic model. Not an anomaly, but a new baseline. Kade's unplanned bond had set this in motion, not through calculated breeding, but through resonant alignment, his soul's frequency fitting into the Invar lattice with unexpected precision. The Dulce files hinted at similar outcomes. Amid the documented failures, a few hybrid entities exhibited not rejection, but unique adaptive capacities, enhanced empathic range, multi-layered cognitive processing, and the ability to perceive and translate emotional frequencies across species barriers. These traits were not statistical outliers. They were the hallmarks of successful hybrid resonance. For the Catheri, this was heresy made manifest. The question, however, was never about purity. It was about survival through evolution. Kade's bond forced a re-evaluation of identity itself. Was Catheriness defined by unbroken genetic patterns, or by the ability of their cultural essence to propagate through adaptive hosts? The answer lay not in the council chambers, but in the subtle shifts of the blade's resonance, in the way clan sigils responded to Kade's presence, recalibrating, reconfiguring, not rejecting, but absorbing. This process was not seamless. Resistance festered in the undercurrents of Catheri society. Traditionalists clung to the narrative of contamination, blind to the living evidence of evolutionary symbiosis before them. Yet, as with all systems exposed to undeniable data, cracks formed. Hybridization, once a specter of extinction, revealed itself as a vector of transcendence. The forbidden prophecy had not warned of a cataclysm. It had mapped a necessary divergence. A blueprint where the merging of disparate frequencies would birth a lineage no longer shackled to static geometries, but capable of dynamic resonance across the shifting patterns of the cosmos. Kade Mercer did not redefine what it meant to be Cathari. He expanded its bandwidth. Thus, the hybrid was not a dilution. It was the next octave. The child born of Kade Mercer and Larati Invar was not a political token. His existence was not a convenient symbol of alliance nor a biological trophy to wave before skeptical elders. He was a disruption of definitions, a living contradiction, a being who existed where once there was no conceptual space to exist. The Cathari referred to such a phenomenon as a node of confluence, a point where two distinct patterns, thought irreconcilable, not only intersected but generated a new harmonic resonance. This child was not a bridge. He was the emergence of a third paradigm, born from but no longer beholden to the dichotomy of human and Cathari. The ancient texts spoke of the child of two skies, a figure shrouded in allegory, foretold not to unify through conquest or subjugation, but through the quiet, relentless gravitational pull of being simultaneously of both and neither. This echoes eerily in modern human phenomena. Across cultures, the rise of starseed children has been documented not as a fringe belief, but as an emergent psychological and spiritual narrative. These individuals, often from a young age, claim an intrinsic connection to extraterrestrial origins. Their testimonies speak of memories not of this world, of emotional landscapes shaped by stars rather than soil, of missions not assigned by nations, but by the cosmic pulse of a larger consciousness. Skeptics dismiss these accounts as the byproducts of suggestibility, yet the consistency of themes across geographical, cultural, and socio-economic divides suggests otherwise. What if these narratives are not delusions, but early resonances of a hybrid consciousness seeking manifestation? The Cathari child, product of earthborn will and starborn legacy, embodied this potential in the flesh. His physiology did not align perfectly with Cathari norms, nor did it mirror human baselines. His neural structures exhibited fractal complexity, allowing for simultaneous multi-layered cognition. His emotional bandwidth exceeded human spectral ranges, registering nuances in vibrational empathy previously inaccessible to either species. Where Kade saw conflict, the child perceived harmony in dissonance. This was not genetic advantage. It was resonant adaptability, a capability not to homogenize, but to integrate divergence into coherence. Such attributes reframed the very concept of hybrid. No longer a blending of bloodlines to dilute or enhance, but a gestalt emergence, where the resulting entity was more than the sum of its parts, a carrier of a new paradigm of existence. The societal implications rippled outward. Among the Cathari, factions that had clung to purity narratives found their arguments dissolving, not through debate, but through the undeniable presence of a child who did not threaten their identity but expanded it. Resistance shifted from overt hostility to reluctant curiosity. The child's mere interactions, his laughter, his questions, his effortless oscillation between human spontaneity and Cathari introspection became a daily proof of concept, coexistence not as tolerance, but as symbiosis. This parallels the transformative impact of bicultural and multiracial generations in human societies. Historically marginalized, these identities now challenge and redefine social constructs, dissolving rigid categories into fluid spectrums. What once was viewed as mixed or other becomes, in time, the new normative standard. The Cathari witnessed this shift in accelerated microcosm. The child's interactions revealed that cultural and biological hybridity did not erode identity. Instead, it introduced a dynamic adaptability, enabling fluid resonance across social, emotional, and even energetic spectrums. The clan sigils, Once static emblems, began to shimmer with subtle variances when in his presence, reflecting not dilution, but expansion of pattern complexity. This phenomenon recontextualized the ancient prophecy. The child of two skies was not a harbinger of cultural annihilation, but a living proof that identity, when allowed to breathe, evolves into forms unimagined by those who first named it. For humanity, the implications are profound. If starseed children represent early manifestations of this paradigm, then the future of human evolution may not lie in technological augmentation or isolationist preservation, but in the conscious integration of Earth-born instinct with star-born resonance. Not a replacement of what we are, but an elevation through symbiosis. Kade's child was not an endpoint. He was a threshold. A living answer to the question, can two species, with divergent origins, forge not a temporary truce, but a shared harmonic existence where both not only survive, but transcend through convergence? The Cathari had their answer. Humanity, perhaps, is next. Fear is a currency older than any empire. Among the Cathari, it was minted not in gold or power, but in the purity of bloodlines. The political structure of Cathalar thrived on the illusion of unbroken lineage, a fragile architecture where ancestry equated legitimacy, and deviation was synonymous with collapse. Into this brittle edifice stepped Kade Mercer, an outsider whose very breath was a challenge to centuries of insular orthodoxy. The elder councils, veiled in ceremonial gravitas, disguised their terror behind rhetoric of tradition. Yet their whispered counsels betrayed them. The merging of Kade's human essence with the Invar lineage was not a scandal, it was an existential threat. It dismantled the foundation upon which their authority had been built, the sanctity of blood as the sole validator of power. But power, once predicated on static purity, becomes brittle when confronted with adaptive reality. This political dissonance finds echoes in human history. The clandestine Majestic 12 program, birthed from post-Roswell paranoia, epitomized institutional fear in the face of disruptive truths. Designed to control, obfuscate, and weaponize information about extraterrestrial contact, Majestic 12 functioned not as a guardian of public interest, but as a bulwark protecting established hierarchies from the destabilizing implications of alien existence. Their fear was never the aliens themselves. It was the repercussions of humanity realizing it was not the apex species. Disclosure threatened not physical security, but ideological dominance. So too did Kade's child threaten the Cathari elite not through might, but by embodying a reality where bloodline purity was rendered obsolete by resonant compatibility. Their political machinery, finely tuned to exploit fear of the other, now found itself ensnared in a paradox. To reject the hybrid was to defy the sacred blade's choice, an act of blasphemy. To accept him was to concede that their power structure was built on an archaic illusion. The politics of fear operates in shadows. It thrives on ambiguity, on controlling the narrative before facts solidify into consensus. The Cathari elite sought to deploy the same strategy. Whisper campaigns painted the hybrid child as an omen of dissolution, a harbinger of chaos masked in innocent flesh. The clan assemblies echoed with carefully seeded doubts, each rhetorical question, each half-truth, a calculated filament of control. But the politics of fear is inherently unsustainable against the inertia of collective awakening. Kade's presence, unfiltered and unapologetically human, was a catalyst. His bluntness, once dismissed as crude, became a mirror reflecting the absurdities of Cathari orthodoxy. Larati's unwavering stance, no longer merely defensive, evolved into a strategic reframing. We are not diluting the Invar line. We are expanding its capacity to survive. And then came the resonance shifts. The Invar stronghold, a living architecture attuned to lineage frequencies, began to respond to the child with patterns unseen in recorded history. Glyphs, once static, refracted light into new spectrums. Ancestral sigils pulsed with layered harmonics, creating visual symphonies that spoke of evolution, not contamination. These were not metaphors. They were physical manifestations of a shifting reality that could not be legislated away. Majestic 12 once believed that through suppression, the narrative could be controlled indefinitely. But as the UFO phenomenon transitioned from isolated sightings to a collective archetype through pop culture, whistleblowers, and grassroots movements, the mythos transcended its quarantined origins. No firewall can contain a signal whose frequency resonates with the collective unconscious. The Cathari political elite faced the same inevitability. Each attempt to marginalize the hybrid child's significance only amplified his symbolic gravitas. Every whispered denunciation catalyzed deeper curiosity among younger generations, who saw in him not a threat, but a blueprint for adaptive identity. The politics of fear, once effective in maintaining stasis, now accelerated its own obsolescence. Power rooted in the fear of change cannot survive the momentum of awakening. Kade Mercer's inadvertent intrusion into Cathari lineage politics exposed a universal truth: when identity is defined by exclusion, it becomes a brittle artifact vulnerable to the softest breath of reality. The hybrid child did not need to wield power. His existence was power. As the resonance harmonics of the Invar sigils continued to evolve, so too did the socio-political landscape. A paradigm shift had begun not through revolution, but through the quiet, inexorable expansion of what it meant to belong. The politics of fear could not halt this tide. For fear is reactive. But resonance, once awakened, is relentless. Kade Mercer was never meant to be a diplomat. He was forged in the pragmatism of mercenary life, where survival outranked eloquence, and deals were struck with actions, not words. Yet within the vaulted chambers of Kethalar, among stone walls alive with ancestral frequencies, he stood as the inadvertent fulcrum between two civilizations. Not by appointment. By consequence. The Cathari saw him first as anomaly, then as threat, and only reluctantly as possibility. Yet what their councils, with all their ritualized vision, failed to grasp was a truth older than their traditions: bridges are not built by decree, but by resonance of shared essence. Kade's role mirrored an emerging archetype in human experience: the ambassadors of contact, individuals unaffiliated with governments or militaries, yet pivotal in establishing meaningful interactions with non-human intelligences. Research from the CE5 community documents countless accounts where ordinary people, through intentional coherence, initiated contact protocols far more successfully than institutional efforts. Their commonality was not rank, but authenticity. Sincerity of presence became the key that opened interspecies dialogue. Within the Cathari paradigm, Kade embodied this disruptive authenticity. His lack of reverence for symbolic formalities, once seen as vulgar, gradually revealed itself as an unexpected advantage. Where Cathari diplomacy danced around layers of encoded meaning, Kade's blunt honesty cut through obfuscation, resonating not with titles, but with the raw frequencies of sentient connection. This dissonance became a new harmony. In private conclaves, Kade's interactions with Cathari artisans, scholars, and even rival clan warriors revealed a pattern. Conversations that began in mistrust often ended in unexpected moments of alignment, shared frustrations, common desires, and the universal ache of legacy's weight. Through these unfiltered exchanges, Kade became less an emissary, more a living interface, translating not language, but intent. This dynamic is not alien to human history. Consider the role of cultural intermediaries, individuals like Sacagawea, who navigated the chasm between indigenous knowledge and European expeditions, not by erasing identities, but by weaving them into functional coexistence. Or the Tuareg guides of the Sahara, whose understanding of multiple tribal dialects enabled trade routes that empires alone could not sustain. Kade's bridge was of similar nature but scaled to interspecies dimensions. The hybrid child he fathered was the biological proof of concept. But Kade himself was the cultural prototype, a human capable of existing within Ketheri symbolic space without dissolving into assimilation or rejection. His presence forced both species to confront uncomfortable questions: is identity a static preservation of form, or a dynamic expression of resonance? Each council session, once arenas of passive-aggressive formalism, transformed in his presence. His challenges, often perceived as crude irreverence, initiated dialogues long considered taboo. The question was no longer whether an outsider could understand Ketheri ways, but whether Ketheri ways could evolve to accommodate the living reality of convergence. This mirrors the CE5 phenomenon, where contact experiences often bypass technological mediation in favor of direct consciousness-to-consciousness interfaces. Participants describe encounters where the depth of connection depended not on hierarchy, but on the vibrational coherence of shared intent. Kade, in essence, operated on this frequency. His lack of diplomatic training, his disregard for ceremonial artifice, became assets precisely because they allowed for genuine resonance unfiltered by political stratification. The bridge he embodied was not an edifice of negotiation. It was a living conduit of mutual recognition. Among the Ketheri, a shift occurred not proclaimed, but felt. Younger generations, less burdened by the calcified fears of their elders, gravitated towards Kade's approach. His willingness to confront discomfort, to embrace ambiguity without demanding immediate resolution, became a new template for interaction. He did not demand acceptance. He demonstrated coexistence. In doing so, Kade exemplified a truth that transcended species: the most profound bridges are not structures built to span divides, but states of being that dissolve the illusion of separation. Thus, the politics of identity gave way to the physics of resonance. Not through treaties, through presence. And in that presence, the first true bridge between Earth-born humanity and star-born legacy was not constructed. It was lived. The blade had no consciousness as mortals understood it. It did not think, nor did it judge. Yet within its crystalline lattice, across molecular memories forged in stellar furnaces, it listened. Not to words, not to bloodlines, but to resonant patterns of will. When Kade Mercer seized the blade, it was not his strength, nor his defiance, that echoed loudest. It was the undistilled clarity of his intent. The Ketheri had mistaken tradition for destiny. To them, lineage dictated purpose, as if DNA strands were cosmic chains binding the future to ancestral designs. The blade, however, recognized a deeper architecture. It sought not continuity of form, but coherence of frequency. In Kade, it found an unorthodox alignment, a chaotic human rhythm that, paradoxically, completed the harmonic void left by a decaying bloodline. Thus, the moment of contact was not random. It was the convergence of divergent threads, woven across lifetimes, cultures, and unspoken histories, collapsing into a singular act of choice. This phenomenon echoes a broader truth in human evolution. Consider the principle of selective consciousness. While natural selection filters genetic viability, there exists a parallel process: the selection of ideas, of narratives, of resonant values that outlive the fragile vessels of biology. Throughout history, pivotal shifts have not been triggered by technological leaps or empires' might, but by individuals whose actions resonated beyond their time. The blade's choice mirrored this principle. It was not seeking a warrior. It was seeking a node of transformation. Kade's intervention, born of instinct rather than strategy, exemplified this dynamic. His act of defense was not a calculated political maneuver. It was a spontaneous alignment of will and circumstance, amplified by the blade's capacity to recognize potential beyond blood. In that clash of steel, a new evolutionary pathway unfurled, one where legacy was no longer a static inheritance, but a living dialogue between past, present, and emergent possibility. The Ketheri, bound by the illusion of purity, faced a revelation: the future cannot be preserved, it must be created. Their sacred blade had become an instrument of this creation, selecting not from bloodlines, but from frequencies of intent. This selection process is not foreign to human history. From the axial age, where solitary philosophers redefined the spiritual and ethical frameworks of entire civilizations, to the quiet revolutions of visionaries whose resonance with collective consciousness transcended their mortal lives, humanity's greatest evolutionary leaps have been seeded by such selective harmonies. The blade's choice was a cosmic reiteration of this truth. Legacy is not an artifact to be guarded. It is a frequency to be attuned, refined, and rebroadcast across the fabric of existence. Kade's unintended role became a living testament to this paradigm. His bond with Larati, the birth of their hybrid child, and the cascading socio-cultural shifts within Ketheri society were not products of conquest or assimilation, but of resonant integration. Each choice, each confrontation, each reluctant alliance threads in a larger tapestry where identity was not erased, but elevated through convergence. In this light, the blade's selection was not a divine anointment. It was a catalytic acknowledgement that the universe favors adaptability, that evolution thrives not in rigid preservation, but in the fertile chaos of unlikely harmonies. This is the essence of selective consciousness in evolution. Not survival of the strongest, but survival of the most resonant. The Ketheri blade had merely enacted, on a symbolic scale, what the cosmos has always practiced on an ontological level. And in this, Kade's story transcends its setting. He is no longer just the man who wielded an alien sword. He becomes an archetype, a mirror reflecting humanity's own evolutionary trajectory. His journey embodies the truth that progress is not born from the consolidation of power, but from the courage to resonate across boundaries of difference. Thus, the final lesson emerges. The grand evolution of civilizations does not hinge on technological supremacy, nor on the dominion of the pure, but on the subtle, relentless resonance between heart and mind, between those courageous enough to be different, yet coherent enough to connect. In the vast orchestra of the cosmos, it is not the loudest, nor the most ornate, who shape destiny. It is those whose frequencies bridge the silence between stars. So, what began as an accidental act of mercy became a chain reaction that changed an entire world. A sword that listened, a prophecy long buried, a child born of two stars, and the quiet, relentless power of a man who chose to stand where no one else would. Now it's your turn to reflect. What was the most powerful moment in this story for you? If you were in Kade's place, would you have taken the sword? Would you walk away, or embrace a destiny you never asked for? Let us know in the comments. What part of this tale resonated most with you, and do you believe humanity is ready to evolve not through power, but through resonance? And if you're as fascinated by stories that blend alien lore, consciousness, and deep emotional evolution, don't forget to subscribe to the Alien Storyverse, where we explore the mysteries that bind galaxies and hearts.